to give a little bit of a bio on Peter, and his name is Peter McCartney. First I thought it's going to be Paul McCartney, but it doesn't quite work, so we'll just go with Peter this time, okay? He is the climate campaigner at the Wilderness Committee, where he mobilizes communities against fossil fuel export projects and in favor of real climate solutions. With a background in journalism and political science, he works through grassroots education and strategic research to generate public support for climate action. Currently, his top priority is ending fracking in DC, and preventing new liquefied natural gas plants from undermining the province's climate commitments. So, Peter, I'm so excited to hear you today, so please let's get on and don't let only those few people here, discourage you, okay?
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you Robin and Dick and everyone from the Rotary Club who put on this awesome event today. How many folks in the crowd know what fracking is? Most of you? Awesome. So you've seen videos like this one of people being able to light their tap water on fire. That's what fracking does to people's groundwater. This is in the United States, but in British Columbia, I don't know if anybody can light their tap water on fire, but we do know of one lady who the pond outside of her home is on fire 24/7 because of the fracking operations. So fracking is, sometimes the videos like to play twice, so you can go down to the next one.
I'm just trying to get the slide to advance. There we go.
There we go. So fracking is how gas companies get, fracked or natural gas out of the ground. It's in shale rock beds, a couple kilometers below the ground, and they use a mixture of water, of silica sand, which is a known carcinogen that's mined from all over the prairies, and a toxic chemical cocktail of over 200 compounds, surfactants, lubricants, all this stuff. Mix it all together, and then they pump it underground at really, really high pressure in a well. And what that does is that shatters open the shale rock underneath, water flows into all the pores in between it, and that pushes the gas up, and they can extract it and then process it for consumer use. The problem is that this is not by any means a perfect process, and companies really don't know what they're doing down there when they fire all that water down there. It ends up migrating into people's groundwater aquifers through fissures in the rock. It causes earthquakes, which causes the rock to snap, and that's how gas and water and chemicals are able to get into people's groundwater. And the process itself, the gas that they are fracking for is methane gas, an extremely potent greenhouse gas, which we'll talk about in a bit. And so that gas escapes from improperly sealed well casings. If something cracks during an earthquake, it can leak that gas directly into the atmosphere. And that's a real problem for the climate. Has anybody here been to northeastern BC, like the Peace region? Yeah. If you've been lately, you know the mess that fracking companies have made up there. There's over 30,000 wells in northeastern British Columbia where forests and farmland have been destroyed for this industry. And when you add up all of the access roads, processing plants, compressor stations, pipelines, wastewater ponds, all of this infrastructure covers an area 5 times the size of Alberta's tar sands. It is a massive footprint on northeastern BC, the size of some provinces, that has been destroyed in the advancement of this industry.
You got to tell me when to advance.
Yeah, go ahead to the next slide.
Come on. Why isn't it going? Oh, there we go.
Oh, sorry. This is a little animation of how it works. You can go ahead to the next slide. So the Treaty 8 First Nations in northeastern BC, one of the Treaty 8 First Nations, Blueberry River, recently sued the provincial government for the cumulative impact of gas on their territory, as well as all the other industrial disturbances, forestry and farming and all of these. Because 84% of their territory lies within half a kilometer of industrial disturbance. How can you practice your traditional way of life when this is what's happened to your territory? You can see all of the little, they almost look like kind of hieroglyphs spreading out across the land. This is over the past 20 years in northeastern BC, and honestly, you could point this pretty much anywhere along the Montney Shale Basin, and you would see a similar pattern. Go ahead. One of the big problems is the amount of water.
Oil and gas companies in northern BC are now under water restrictions due to drought conditions. The BC's energy regulator has cancelled 21 permits for energy companies that take water from rivers, streams, and lakes. Betsy Trumpeter has more.
Energy drilling in BC is a thirsty business, especially fracking, which uses lots of water. Oil and gas operators draw that water from northern lakes, rivers, and streams. Now, drought conditions have changed that. BC's energy regulator says there are growing concerns for fish and the water supply for nearby communities. So, the BC Oil and Gas Commission is barring 12 energy operators from drawing water from the Peace and Liard River watersheds. CBC meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff says there are level 3 drought conditions.
We've seen little rain since basically the start of July, and the forecast calls for a dry rest of September as well.
With little rain in the forecast, BC's largest wildfire also continues to burn in northeastern BC. Betsy Trumpeter, CBC News, Prince George.
So that was last year. The drought is even worse now. Fracking companies take 5
Oil and
billion
gas companies in
liters
northern
of
BC
water.
are now under water restrictions due to drought.
The video playing is a little odd on this one.
Oil and gas companies in
There we go.
Yeah. 5 billion liters of water a year from rivers and lakes in northeastern British Columbia. They want to double that if the liquefied natural gas industry that the fracking companies are proposing comes to fruition. And this is the only industry in British Columbia where they are allowed to take fresh water from local waterways, mix it with toxic chemicals and poison it, and then dump it underground untreated. Anybody else that uses water in the province has to get special water treatment for it. They have to be able to rectify that, and these companies just leave it underground where it will eventually seep into local waterways. One of the things about the fracking industry that is kind of ironic is that the very droughts that the industry is fueling with climate change are actually causing them to shut down. They have, as you heard in the news report, they've had to shut down 3 times over the past couple of years because there's just not enough water left in the rivers to be able to support the ecosystems in northeastern BC and maintain this fracking industry. So the reason that they are causing that drought immediately by taking 5 billion liters of water from northeastern BC, but they're also causing it because of the climate impacts of the industry. So you can go to the next slide.
New video.
And in the interior of BC, Canada's hotspot of Lytton hit 48.6 degrees on June 29th. The next day, Lytton burned to the ground. Meanwhile, heat-related deaths were skyrocketing in the province.
Provincially, over this 1 week period, the hottest 1 week, there was about a 100% increase in provincial
Mortality.
Let me get to the next slide so we don't have the same problem.
Okay.
Come on, there we go.
There we go. So the reason fracking in particular is so bad for the climate is the gas that they're fracking for, methane gas. The shape of the molecule allows it to trap 86 times more heat than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So even just a little bit of this gas entering the atmosphere is a huge problem for the climate. It lasts for less time in the atmosphere, so after about 20 years, it's converted to carbon dioxide. But during that 20 years, it does 86 times more damage. That means it delivers a lot of global heating very quickly. And methane gas is responsible for about a quarter of the warming that we've seen already so far. The majority of the excess methane gas that's in the atmosphere right now comes from fracking for oil and gas on a global scale. So this industry is one of the priority targets that all international agencies are saying we need to focus on in order to reduce the rate of global warming right now. Even if you don't count the methane pollution, I mean, BC has methane regulations. They are trying to reduce the amount. They cannot eliminate the amount of methane going into the atmosphere, but they can design things and do best practices to keep it from going in there. But even without all that methane, burning gas still creates climate pollution. When the consumer finally uses it in their furnace or their boiler, and it creates carbon dioxide to enter the atmosphere. So from the UN Environment Program to the International Energy Agency, experts are saying we cannot build more fossil fuel projects and maintain that 1.5 degree limit of global warming that the whole world has agreed to try and reach. The amount of gas that we are burning on a global scale has to plummet by 2030 in order for us to maintain that track to get to net zero by 2050, which would allow us to maintain a safe climate on planet Earth. So just as all of these liquefied natural gas facilities are coming online, the world will be moving away from them as fast as possible. At the end of the day, you know, there are lots, I'm sure you've all seen the ads on buses, on billboards, claiming that LNG is going to be good for the climate. But the truth is that climate change will just continue to get worse until we stop burning fossil fuels. Fracked gas is just another fossil fuel. It is not better than coal from the climate's perspective and the life cycle emissions that are involved with it. On the plus side, once we stop using fossil fuels and are actually not putting more pollution into the atmosphere every year than the Earth can successfully sequester, the good news is that the climate's going to stabilize pretty quickly. And that wasn't the best science when I started this job almost a decade ago. We kind of thought there would be tipping points that we would hit, and that if we reached those, the Earth would just keep warming. But actually the best science says that, yeah, when we stop doing this, it's going to stabilize within about a decade. That's extremely good news because it means that we have the option. Once we stop doing this, once we actually get our act together and move on to sustainable sources of energy, it means that we're going to be okay. Go ahead.
It's made up of more than 600 kilometers of pipeline stretching to the coast, plus a terminal in Kitimat, all of it being built by a consortium of energy companies seeking the fastest route to Asia for North American natural gas. It has support from all levels of government and local First Nations, but as Greg Rasmussen tells us, it's not short on critics or controversy.
So why are we trying to stop fracking in BC? We talked about, we are moving to sustainable sources of energy. Folks are getting off of gas in their own homes. They are turning to renewable energy to heat their homes and heat up their hot water. But at the same time, this government is trying to build a liquefied natural gas industry that would double gas production in British Columbia. So there are 5 liquefied natural gas plants proposed in BC. There's 2 here in the Lower Mainland, Tilbury LNG, which is right in the Fraser River between Delta and Richmond. There's Woodfibre LNG, which is on Howe Sound in Squamish. And then there are 3 up north, 3 kind of serious proposals up north. Cedar LNG and LNG Canada, the latter of which is already under construction in Kitimat. And then there's Sillicim's LNG, which is a little further north at the mouth of the Nass River. And so altogether, these 5 LNG terminals would produce 30 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions every year if they were all to move forward. BC's entire carbon footprint right now is only about double that. And so they would more than take up our targets for 2040 in order to be able to meet the province's climate commitments. So the way that the gas comes from fracking fields, they take it out, they'll pipe it through pipelines. Lots of folks will remember it's sort of the controversy and the fight over the Coastal GasLink pipeline with the Wet'suwet'en Nation earlier this decade. They take that gas, pump it across the province to liquefied natural gas facilities, then they freeze it down to negative 162 degrees Celsius. So cryogenic levels of gas to load onto tankers, which they take across the Pacific Ocean to Asia. That's why these LNG facilities are so polluting, is because it takes an enormous amount of energy to be able to do this, to freeze that gas down to those cryogenic temperatures. If we were to build this industry and electrify it, which is what the government is proposing to do with all of the remaining liquefied natural gas facilities, we would need 8.4 Site C dams worth of power in order to run these facilities. And I can't think of a stupider use of renewable energy than to use it to export fossil fuels and only make the climate crisis worse. Sorry, I lost track of myself. This is really the industry's sort of life preserver, because the truth is, in British Columbia, we are moving off gas. We are using things like heat pumps. But the industry is looking at overseas markets so that they can get higher prices for their gas and continue fracking in BC for decades to come. So we really need to stop these liquefied natural gas terminals in order to prevent the industry from just continuing to grow inevitably and blowing our climate targets. So BC has a target for oil and gas, the oil and gas sector. It's supposed to reduce by 1/3 by 2030. But basically every new LNG terminal that they approve only takes us further and further away from their target, and nothing that the government has proposed actually ensures that the gas industry is going to meet this target when they are approving new projects that make it harder every day. So go ahead and switch to the next slide.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, LNG Canada Phase 1 is definitely modeled in the Clean BC plan. It continues to be modeled in the roadmap. In addition to that, we have a sectoral target of reducing emissions from the oil and gas sector overall by 33 to 38%. That's clearly part of the emission reductions projected in the roadmap. We've made it very clear. We expect to bring down emissions to at least 9 megatons in this sector by 2030. We need to work with Indigenous nations, with the industry, with experts to determine how to do that, and we'll use regulation where necessary, as well as policies and different programs and different forms of emission reduction.
So that's Environment Minister George Heyman. In 2017, when they got elected, we said, hey, you can't build LNG. And meet your climate commitments. And they said, no, it's fine. We have this target for the oil and gas industry that we'll deal with that target. We're going to make them reduce emissions, just trust us. 7 years later, and they still can't tell us how the oil and gas industry is going to meet that target. In the meantime, they've approved 2 more liquefied natural gas facilities. Cedar LNG got its permits last year, and, well, I guess 1.5. Tilbury LNG, the marine portion of the project, so the one that's actually in the river, was approved just a couple weeks ago. And targets aren't a plan. You can't just say, yeah, well, we modeled that the oil and gas industry meets its 1/3 reduction target, and so we can build as many LNG terminals as we want. It's fine. That is essentially what the government is saying right now. They're saying we have an emissions cap, which doesn't actually cap emissions. They're going to attempt to put a price and make the economics of this industry to steer them so that the industry makes that 2030 target. But there's no government alive that is going to allow a liquefied natural gas industry to be built, and then, if necessary, increase the cost for them so much that those projects will have to shut down. So it doesn't give us any confidence that the industry is actually going to meet these targets. They talk about net zero guidelines for their new liquefied natural gas proposals, but the other environment minister, Catherine McKenna, the federal environment minister, was on a panel that the UN Secretary General tasked with defining net zero, because we are not the only place in the world where politicians and industry are trying to greenwash and call things net zero when they really have no part in climate action. And they were extremely clear. They found that net zero means you have to stop investing in fossil fuels. You can't claim to have a net zero liquefied natural gas plant. Unfortunately, the gas industry is lobbying the provincial officials that we have up to 3 times a day, an average of 3 times a day. And the provincial government has fallen for it. And basically they have said, we need to find a way to try and meet our climate commitments while building this brand new liquefied natural gas industry. And if you can make the modeling work, that's good enough for them. But we know that that's not how things play out on the ground. And if these projects are built, they will be the most polluting projects in the province at a time when we're trying to reduce our emissions. So how do we push back against the industry's lobbying efforts?
Oh, did I skip too far?
It should be on, no, sorry. Maybe I'm skipping around in my notes here. What we're doing instead. Who in here knows what a heat pump is? Most people in this room? Excellent. So this is how a heat pump works. They're pretty simple technology.
It's me, Dave, and this is a heat pump. It's an energy-efficient heating and cooling system you can install at home. How does it work? Here, let me show you. Your typical air source heat pump, like this mini split system, has 2 main components, an indoor and an outdoor unit, which are connected by a refrigerant line. To heat your home in the winter, the outdoor unit pulls heat from the air outside your home. Yes, believe it or not, even when it's cold, outside air still contains a certain amount of heat. The warm air then goes through a refrigerant coolant that is compressed to increase the temperature even more. This warm air is then pushed through to the home. In the summer, to cool your home, the process is reversed. The heat pump absorbs the warm air in your home and transfers it outside. The compressor circulates refrigerant to the indoor evaporator coil, and the refrigerant absorbs heat as it passes over the indoor air. The resulting cool and dehumidified air then gets blown back into the home. And that's how a heat pump works. The key here is that heat pumps don't generate heat, but instead they move it from one place to another, which is why heat pumps are so energy efficient. In fact, a heat pump can be up to 300% more efficient than electric baseboards. So if you already have electric heat, a heat pump can help you save on your energy bill. Less energy and more savings? I like. If you're switching from a fossil fuel-based heating source like a natural gas furnace, you'll be reducing your carbon footprint. It's kind of like going from a size 18 down to a size 2. You get the idea. It's an environmentally friendly option, especially here in BC where we're powered by water. Plus, with rebates from Clean BC and BC Hydro, there's more to save.
So, what we do instead of gas, I get asked all the time, you know, okay, but how am I supposed to heat my house? How am I supposed to cook my food without the fracked gas that comes from northeastern BC? And the good news is that we have all the technology we need to replace gas already. The vast majority of the domestic use for gas in our society is for home heating and water heating. So space heating and water heating. Heat pumps, as you know, are a incredible technology that runs on renewable energy, super, super efficient, and they can heat people's homes and heat their water without. District energy is another great way where you can take the whole neighborhood and put it on one grid for moving heat around. So if you've been to Vancouver's Falls Creek, like Olympic Village neighborhood, there's a little installation under the Canby Bridge where they take the heat, using similar technology to heat pumps, take the heat out of the runoff wastewater that is coming from all of the buildings in the neighborhood, heat water back up, and then pump it back to every building in the neighborhood. It's funny because people are like, waste? Like, how much waste heat could there possibly be? But when you think of it, the water that is coming from your home is actually mostly from your shower, from your dishwasher, from your laundry machine, so it's really hot water. And that energy, instead of being wasted and put out into the environment, we can recapture that, bring it back to people's homes. For cooks, if anyone here is a home cook, there are some people who are pretty attached to their stoves, but I'm telling you, induction stoves are a miracle to cook on after a gas stove. They use magnets inside the stove to create a convection current in the actual pan, so that you're heating up the pan and not just sort of spraying heat off into the environment. A lot of commercial kitchens are actually switching to induction because it is way better for working conditions. If you're sitting in a hot kitchen all day, if anybody's ever worked as a cook, it is a nightmare. And so just being able to do these things with induction stoves means that you are actually getting all the heat into the food instead of heating up your whole room. For northeastern BC, I think is the bigger question, right? There are lots of communities that rely on the fossil fuel industry right now, that have tens of thousands of people that live there that didn't before the gas industry came here. And so we produced a report a couple of years ago. We interviewed northern mayors and northern leaders from First Nations and said, hey, what can you do here instead of the gas industry? Like, what does the transition look like in a place that is so heavily industrialized with fossil fuels? And the biggest response that we got back is actually ecological restoration. There are tons of jobs in fixing the mess that this industry has left all over northeastern British Columbia. The Blueberry River First Nations, the ones who I mentioned earlier, who successfully sued the provincial government, as part of that settlement, they are spending millions of dollars building their territory back to what it once was so they can use it again. And putting people to work doing it for their members and for other people in the community. Renewable energy projects in northeastern BC are sitting there waiting to be taken up by the next call for power from the provincial government. It is the windiest, one of the windiest places in the province, I should say, and also one of the sunniest. And so there is plenty of opportunity for renewable energy. It's not that far from the city of Edmonton. If we could just get our act together with a provincial power sharing agreement and send Alberta excess hydro and renewable energy when they need it, it would fix a lot. So there are plenty of things that we can do in northeastern BC for the communities and workers that are up there. And the truth is, at the moment, the plan is just to leave those people out to dry when the world moves off of fossil fuels without them. And I don't think that that's like a sustainable transition plan or a plan that benefits anyone. The sooner we start getting prepared for this, the better. So now we can talk about why politicians haven't done this. I was just talking about the lobbying, the industry, and how we can push back against it.
A small but loud group of anti-fracking protesters demonstrated outside Government House as Premier David Eby and his new cabinet arrived.
So that was Premier Eby's cabinet swearing-in ceremony a year and a half ago, and a handful of us were out there to greet the new cabinet ministers and tell them to put gas and the climate on their radar. And that was the first action of Frack Free BC, which is the group that I'm here with today. It's a coalition of the Wilderness Committee, Stand, and Dogwood are sort of the three groups that meet on the steering committee. And then there are networks of local groups all across the province who are engaging with us to put pressure on their MLAs to stop the government and get them to change direction. The truth is that, and we've been doing this at the Wilderness Committee for almost 45 years, politicians, we think of them as our leaders, but they're not leaders, they're followers. They rarely do what is, just right and sensible because our system defines what is right as what is popular and what gets them reelected. And so by organizing our communities, we need to build the movement that makes it possible for the BC NDP government to turn its back and abandon the plans for liquefied natural gas in this province. The way that we can do that is in places like Chilliwack. I can show them how many East Van activists are opposed to fracking, but they are worried that if they take action on this industry, that folks in the Fraser Valley are not going to be up for that. And I know that that's not the case. I know that there are people that care about the climate, that understand the connection between gas and the climate disasters that we've seen wreaking havoc in our communities, in every community in this province. And so our goal with Frack Free BC isn't to, convert a whole lot of people, is to show them that actually, there is already a movement of people across the province that wants them to take action. So over the next couple months and couple years, because Lord knows we won't have this all done by the next provincial election, but we're going to be organizing in the Fraser Valley. We're going to be knocking on doors. We're going to be holding events, coming to events like this one hosted by the Rotary Club, and getting as many people as possible engaged and writing to their MLAs, putting pressure on the provincial government and showing them that this is something that's possible for them, and basically building the runway so that they can land this crazy plane we're all on. So if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in getting involved with, we are hosting our first ever Frack Free BC convention in June. It's called Forward for a Frack Free Future. It's going to be in Vancouver, but we have people coming from all over the province. We're going to hear from speakers from northern BC and really give lots of workshops so that folks can skill up, so that they're prepared to get out in the summer in their communities, talk to people in the lead up to the provincial election, get in front of their candidates, ask them the tough questions about fracking and gas and the climate change, and hopefully show the provincial government that turning their backs on this industry and actually doing what needs to be done in order to meet our climate commitments is going to help them be successful in the next provincial election. So with that, I'll leave it at that. You're more than welcome to come to the table. I'll be here for the rest of the day. You can sign our petition to the provincial government. You also can scan this QR code if you like to do the same thing on your phone. And come chat with me. Let's figure out how we're going to end fracking in this province. And it's going to be a hot summer with wildfires season heating up. And so, let's turn up the heat on the provincial politicians who have the power to stop to mitigate these climate disasters and stop the pollution from the fracking industry entering the atmosphere.
You got about 15 minutes for questions. So
okay. Yes.
All right. Is that conference going to be on Zoom?
At the moment, we are really hoping that folks will attend in person. It's got lots of trainings, and but we are certainly going to put pieces of the conference on Zoom. Yeah. But ideally, folks can be there in person. We'll probably just end up streaming sort of the keynote speakers.
You invited the government to come there?
Not yet. Our plan is to potentially I don't know how much I can share about. We would love to get someone from each of the political parties on a panel to talk about engaging in the political system and some of the challenges that they're facing in getting their own parties to accept that we can't build a gas industry in BC.
Can you comment on the relevance of the amount of methane that escapes in the process of collecting gas by fracking?
Yeah, so the relevance of the amount of the relevance of the amount of methane that escapes, just that tiny amount of gas makes this industry the most polluting industry in British Columbia. I guess the amount that escapes, we have about a 0.42% leakage rate, so it's not a lot of gas. But some research that I've seen out of the United States shows that even at a 0.2% leakage rate, so ours is double that, that is when gas is just as bad as coal. And so the tiny amounts of methane that are spewing into the atmosphere are making this gas worse than coal burning to be able to produce electricity. So, yeah, does that answer your question? Okay.
Quick comment on the coal. Doesn't coal mines, particularly from peat mines, also release a similar amount of methane? I was looking at some IEA data and it was pretty similar. So.
Similar amounts of methane? I'm pretty sure the gas industry in BC anyway produces a significant amount more than the metallurgical coal mines, but...
Just to clarify globally.
Globally, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the case. We mine a lot of coal globally, and so that also generates methane as well. But yeah, ultimately, they're both fossil fuels. They are both heavily polluting, and we have better ways of creating energy than burning them.
Two comments. First of all, your comment about an induction stove. I used one for the first time a week ago. We were at a friend's place. I wish I could have my landlord replace my stove. I'll tell you, it was awesome. So I can see where that's really going to make a big difference. I used to work for a company that was involved in building of the wind turbines, and a lot of the stuff, the feedback was in areas where they put these wind turbines in, was it was hurting the environment because it was killing birds and all that sorts of stuff. Has that been overcome in a way that the wind turbines can go ahead without causing a lot of issues? Or is that still really a problem and you're going to get the naturalists not wanting the birds killed to save the planet for having wind turbines?
Yeah, for sure. It's a really good question. I'm glad you like induction stoves, first of all. They're really cool. I want one as well. I wish my landlord could replace it. In terms of the amount of birds that wind turbines kill, it is still a problem. And so they haven't found a way to make wind turbines not, kill birds. But actually cats kill far more birds on a global level than wind turbines. And so I think, to some extent we should not use that as an excuse not to, transition to renewable energy. But the truth is, there are environmental impacts to any form of energy that we get. And so we need to be thoughtful about where we put these things. I wouldn't put a wind farm at like George C. Rifle Bird Sanctuary. But there are places where they'll have more impacts than others. And the best thing we can do is to use less energy. So, we talk about electric cars and transitioning all of the existing ways that we are burning fossil fuels onto renewable energy, which is good. It should be the goal. But having an electric car in every garage in North America, when a lot of folks probably don't need one if we just design our communities in a way where people are able to get around without one, that kind of solution means that we are having to put up less wind turbines or having to put out less, clear more land for solar panels, dam more rivers, and that kind of thing. So renewable energy is a good thing. I'm definitely not we absolutely need to transition to wind and solar and all the other green energies that we have, but at the same time we should make some decisions that allow us to use less energy in our lives.
Thank you.
I see.
Just want to thank you for saying less. You're the first person, speaker that I've heard here that said we should use less.
Right on.
First one.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can you comment on the capacity of our electrical power grid, and is that going to be an issue for us in the province?
Yeah, totally. We definitely need to expand the power grid in order to electrify everything that we have. There are lots of opportunities to do that, and yeah, we are going to need a lot more power, basically, in BC, and we're going to need a lot more transmission lines. But that's all doable. We have the particularly wind resources, like offshore wind on the north coast. There's just a tremendous amount. We can power like half the province over again just off of the wind potential that's there. But yeah, it is a challenge that we have to be able to get this power to where people are using it, and we're going to have to figure it out. It's certainly, I'd hope, more easier to build a transmission line for electricity than a pipeline. So
as part of your lobbying group to really promote more investment into alternative energies on behalf of provincial and federal government?
yeah, absolutely. Investing in renewable energy is a huge part of what we're asking for. We were really genuinely excited. The provincial government just put $36 billion into renewable energy projects across the province, so we're glad about that. The hesitation we have, we weren't able to cheer them on as much as we maybe would have liked to, because we're still pretty worried that they're going to use a lot of that renewable energy to liquefy natural gas. And so we are definitely advocating for more investment in renewable energy, and for that investment to be used to decarbonize here in BC as opposed to ship more fossil fuels around the world.
Peter, could you comment on the idea of Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3 emissions, and just sort of along the lines of an analogy of a bank robber using an electric vehicle as their escape vehicle? Thank goodness they're doing things responsibly. It's just that the thing they're doing is terrible, terrible, terrible. Could you speak about that?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good one. So for folks that don't know, Schedule 1, 2, and 3 refers to the direct emissions of a company, so the actual pollution that they're putting into the atmosphere. Schedule 2 is the emissions from all of the energy that they get. And so your emissions for Amazon, that would include all of the power that they use in their facilities. And Scope 3 emissions are the total life cycle emissions of the products that they produce. And so we talk about needing to consider the emissions from the actual burning of the fossil fuel projects. And unfortunately in Canada, our governments have sort of accepted the industry's line that they're not responsible for the vast majority of the carbon pollution that comes from when other countries are burning their products. And we just don't think that that's a responsible way to move forward as a country, is to say we're going to do everything we can to reduce the emissions of these actual companies while producing twice as much fossil fuels for the world to burn. That's sort of the difference there, and how we're thinking about Scope 3 emissions. Thanks. Yeah.
A quick comment on the question over here about bird kill. Oil refineries kill many times more birds than wind turbines ever do. The question I have is, listening to George Heyman talking about the province reducing its carbon emissions, would it be correct to assume he's only talking to the pipe where the pipe goes to the water? And so he's talking about fossil gas operations to tidewater. And then if they can ship it to other green countries that want to burn it, they then burn it and they take the emissions hit. Is that fair assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. So Heyman is talking about just the emissions that occur here in BC. And they're actually they're still really substantial emissions. The majority come from when they burn it at a consumer level in Asia. But there's actually huge amounts of methane that escapes from the cargo tankers as they cross the Pacific Ocean. Basically, as that gas warms up, there's nowhere for it to go. They have to vent it out into the atmosphere. And so, yeah, there's tons of emissions that the BC government just isn't even considering because there's somebody else's problem. They're trying to export the pollution. And we worked with climate groups in South Korea, in Indonesia, in Japan, in Malaysia, that tell us, like, please don't send all this liquefied natural gas here. It's only going to slow down our transition to renewable energy. And their governments are just as, sort of heavily lobbied by the gas industry as ours are. So, we've been building lots of sort of connections between our movements and the ones in Asia as well.
Peter, are there not new sources of LNG being discovered around the planet such that our business model might be sort of null and void anyway here in BC? I mean, it would be cheaper to find them closer to home than ship them from BC, would they not?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that you kind of hit the nail on the head of why the economics of the BC industry don't really work in our favor. We have the most expensive LNG proposed anywhere in the world in British Columbia. And the reason for that is that they have to build a pipeline across two mountain ranges and a brand new gas facility to do it. And so, yeah, there are other countries that are more likely to get the liquefied natural gas contracts and exports than Canada ever would. And that sort of cuts into the argument that, well, if we don't do this, someone else is going to, because we are not nobody is saying they're willing to pay a premium for Canadian LNG when the rest of the world is able to produce it at a significantly lower price. So every time I hear Canada hasn't been able to build a gas industry, it's because we're so incompetent or something here because the US has built a bunch of LNG. Well, the US LNG facilities that have all been built had pipelines to them already. They were already had lots of the infrastructure in place. And the US has put a pause on building any new LNG facilities for climate and economic reasons. But there's an LNG facility in Kitimat where they've got this beautiful road. You can tell it was built by a gas company because it's just totally over the top of what a road actually needs to be. All the way out down the Douglas Channel to a big clearing where Kitimat LNG, which was proposed a decade ago by Chevron, was supposed to be built. Nobody's picked up that LNG facility and decided to, finish it off for Chevron. And so the economics of the industry in BC just aren't ever going to deliver the promises that the industry is making. So, yeah, it's a really good point. Thanks.
Does Free BC have a position on the carbon tax?
Free BC doesn't have a position on the carbon tax. It's not something that really falls within our mandate. The Wilderness Committee is supportive of the carbon tax. I think it's not the best way. It is a very effective way to reduce emissions, I would say. We've always had some concerns with how it's politically palatable and whether or not people will at some point decide to revolt against it, which we're of course seeing now. But the truth is that the federal government, this is the policy that they've decided to help us get to our 2030 emissions, and we cannot backtrack on it right now. There's just not time for us to find other ways to reduce emissions in the time that we have. And so, yeah, I think we need to support the climate policies we've already got in place. And what I would argue for the carbon tax is that it's a very sort of large L liberal thing to do, to use these market mechanisms to change people's behavior. And I think at the Wilderness Committee, in order to avoid some of the pushback that we've seen, what we should be doing is saying, yes, the carbon tax, but also we're going to put a heat pump in every house that needs one in Canada, and we're going to start with the lowest income people first. We're going to make the investments in public transit, in all of the climate solutions that enable people to not have to pay the carbon tax. because, you know, otherwise you are just forcing people to make that market decision in a time when the cost of living is already pretty out of control. So that's my carbon tax spiel.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. You have totally enlightened us on fracking. And not only that, you've also given us some idea how we can do without less power. And you know, I think that in Europe they're starting now that they actually have things where people can just go on a bus and go wherever they want to go without actually having to pay anything. Because they're actually making that much money on it so that they can have people go and not pay for anything. So I hope you don't get discouraged because it is a long road, I'm sure of it. But please, thank you so much for helping us understand more about it. Thank you. And oh, by the way, no, I have to tell you this. This is made by one of our local Rotarians, and he is very shy, but I'm going to tell you, he's sitting right there, and he never gets any, how shall I say, gratitude for all the stuff that he does in Rotary. So thank you so very much, Dick, and this is his presentation to you.
Thank you so much everyone for listening. Thank you so much, Dick. This is really sweet, and yeah, we'll talk to you all soon. Come swing by the booth.